This is a special crime in the courtroom update for December 17th, 2024. I'm John Collins. Good to have you with us. As expected, forensic evidence associated with the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in Manhattan is now being analyzed, with some initial results being furnished to the public, at least in part. It's never possible to know the full extent of the forensic evidence being analyzed and completed, and I am also a little bit leery and take with a grain of salt police commanders and attorneys trying to explain as best they can the forensic evidence that is coming in. So we really can't say for sure until these reports get issued into the court record and we can see them for ourselves. But we can predict that forensic evidence, usually of a variety of types or categories, have been collected and are being tested in an accredited forensic science laboratory. We should mention that the most valuable and consequential piece of physical evidence in any murder is the body of the victim. But in addition to the body itself, we have crime scene evidence, which will be collected at the scene of the incident, and we can also expect to have other forms of evidence that are transported with the perpetrator away from the scene. For example, you may have blood from the victim that splashes or spatters onto the clothing of the perpetrator as a result of the gunshot and the pressure that builds up at the point of entry where the bullet enters the body. If the perpetrator is arrested and DNA testing confirms that the blood on the perpetrator's clothing does in fact belong to the victim, then that obviously is very serious incriminating evidence. So when we have a crime like this that is committed, we have to appreciate the complexity of the forensic portion of the investigation, because every crime is so unique in terms of the evidence that is created during its commission. And sometimes it can take much time for this testing to be conducted, because as the case is being investigated, other murders and other rapes and burglaries requiring investigation are happening that also require investigation, and those take time as well. But, excuse me, the fact is that cases having high levels of public attention are always vulnerable to being compromised due to that attention and the pressures that it creates. And so getting the case investigated, solved, and adjudicated as quickly as possible without, of course, compromising the integrity of the process is really important. With regards to the forensic evidence itself, we are now seeing reports that latent fingerprint evidence and firearm evidence have been analyzed, and the results of those analyses appear to support the assertion that Luigi Mangione is, in fact, the perpetrator of Brian Thompson's murder. This is not a final definitive determination of guilt, and we have yet to see some of the really interesting and, well, quite frankly, devastating mental health factors that may be relevant to the case and Mangione's actions. But as far as what happened, those answers are now being delivered through the forensic evidence testing that is taking place and is being completed probably even as we speak. I want to make mention of something else that we should expect in a case like this, which is the commitment made by defense counsel to challenge the admissibility of the forensic evidence in the case. This is normal, and I would, in fact, be surprised if such an effort was not made. It is the job of defense counsel to ensure that the process is legal. And this becomes even more important when there are high levels of pressure and high levels of public attention, as I said a moment ago. Part of ensuring the legality of the proceedings is challenging the constitutional legality or the admissibility of the evidence, including forensic evidence, which is often some of the most compelling evidence in a violent crime investigation. So reports are now coming in that fired cartridge cases were found at the scene of Brian Thompson's killing. We are also learning that Mangione's fingerprints were identified reportedly as being present on a water bottle and a Kind bar wrapper that were found near the scene. And again, as we should expect, the defense will make whatever case it can that this evidence should not be admitted at trial and should therefore not be considered by the judge or the jury, depending on what kind of trial it is. Now, it's worth noting that this murder occurred in New York City, more specifically in Manhattan. As many of you know, for many years now, New York City has been the home of the Innocence Project and ground zero for the entire innocence movement, and the home of some of the most, let's say, progressive advocates for modern day criminal justice reform, much of which is based on the work of the Innocence Project and other innocence clinics around the country, but especially the Innocence Project there in Manhattan. And what it has argued and continues to argue is a leading cause of erroneous convictions, which is invalid forensic evidence, or what is often called junk science. Two of the forensic disciplines, as they are called, disciplines that have received some of the most vigorous criticisms from innocence activists over the last 2 years or so, are the identification of fingerprints and the identification of firearm evidence, which is sometimes called ballistics. On this podcast, we have discussed these kinds of issues in previous episodes, and we will continue to cover them, especially as they relate specifically to this case. But I want to make very clear, and you can read more about these issues in my textbook, Crime Lab Report, which is available on Amazon if you're interested. But I want to make very clear that faulty forensic evidence is not a leading cause of erroneous convictions. I would certainly argue, however, that a faulty forensic result or a misunderstood forensic result is among the most catastrophic that we could possibly experience in a criminal trial. And I will be having a guest on the show next month that will help us explore this further. But we have absolutely no reason to believe that they happen with alarming frequency as a percentage of all forensic testing that is conducted in the United States and around the world. And therefore, it is not and cannot be a leading cause of erroneous convictions. In fact, as I have said before, forensic evidence is without question a leading preventer of erroneous convictions and should be respected as such, deeply respected as such, for the important protections it provides to our pursuit of justice. And this, of course, includes the forensic identification of fingerprints and of firearms and firearm-related evidence, as we have in this case. These are legitimate, heavily researched, heavily validated, scientifically based areas of investigative inquiry, without question. Now, that being said, there is a nuance to this case pertaining to the identification of the fired cartridge cases recovered at the crime scene and apparently identified as being fired in the semi-automatic pistol taken from the possession of Luigi Mangione. And it is quite possible that the defense could have some success with this. And I'm not predicting that it will lead to an acquittal or anything like that, but I do think that the high-profile nature of this case could have an impact on other future cases that face a similar challenge, which is the use of what are called ghost guns in the commission of violent crimes such as this. So to sort of explain this without getting too deep into the weeds, when a cartridge case is fired in a semi-automatic pistol, or what I should say, a cartridge is fired in a semi-automatic pistol, there are typically a variety of hard metal surfaces within the mechanisms of the gun that create unique patterns of microscopic scratches and impressions that are imparted to the surfaces of a cartridge case after the cartridge is fired. The cartridge case is what is left behind when the bullet leaves the cartridge, which is one unit of ammunition immediately after discharge. And the reason these patterns are unique is because of the way they are created during the manufacture of the firearm. And so especially trained and equipped forensic firearm examiners are able to analyze these marks, see the patterns through a comparison microscope, align them side by side to determine that they are the same unique pattern and that they were fired from the same firearm. In the Mangione investigation, there are reports that he used a ghost gun and possibly one that was created with a 3D printer, which means that if that was the case, it was not manufactured in the same way that most guns are, and that it does not have a legitimate serial number, and therefore no way to trace its history of original manufacture or history of ownership. Now, the reports coming from the New York Police Department indicate that forensic experts were able to conclusively identify the crime scene cartridge cases as having been fired in or from Mangione's pistol. So if those reports are correct, what that tells me and what it tells us is that the forensic experts were able to verify the presence of striations, which is a fancy word for scratches, striations or impressions on these cartridge cases that were left by the corresponding patterns within the gun itself. And that those patterns of surface features within the gun are verifiable as being unique themselves. And I trust, based on my experience, that if these experts were able to make the identifications to Mangione's pistol, then they were also able to verify the uniqueness of the surfaces within that pistol. So we have no reason to doubt, at least in practical terms, the validity of the forensic link that was made between the cartridge cases and at the scene and Mangione's pistol, assuming we are being informed properly. But, and this is a big but, we are speaking here in scientific and technical terms. But there's also the legal and the constitutional side. And on the legal and constitutional side, it is unclear to me how much our courts have had the chance to establish some sufficient precedents with regards to the interpretation of forensic evidence associated specifically with ghost guns, and the degree to which forensic experts are able to scientifically confirm the ability of a ghost gun to impart these unique patterns of markings on the bullets and the cartridge cases that are fired within them or from them. So if we are in fact dealing with a ghost gun here, and that ghost gun has been forensically identified as firing the cartridge cases found at the scene, then I would expect a motion to exclude the evidence, and that this motion will result in an admissibility hearing of some sort that could have significant ramifications for the practice of forensic firearm examinations and identifications. Again, I'm not suggesting that this will result in an acquittal or that the evidence will be judged inadmissible in any way, and I don't think that it will. But I do think this case has the potential to be a landmark in the history of firearm-related cases due to the forensic link we have here to a ghost gun. As many of you know from previous episodes, my own forensic technical training and casework experience was in firearm examination and firearm identification. But that was several years ago, and I had no direct experience with ghost guns or 3D printing, and I know that research on these are ongoing. So I'm looking forward to getting an expert on the show to discuss this particular issue with us and bring us up to speed to the degree that we can be on what ghost guns actually are, the challenges that they create forensically for investigators, and also the public safety threat that they pose to all of us in society. So I look forward to that. So just to wrap up our update today, forensic results are being returned in the Luigi Mangione investigation, the identification of fingerprints as belonging to Mangione, and the identification of fired cartridge cases as being fired in Mangione's semi-automatic pistol appeared to be completed. But we can expect the possibility of a defense effort to challenge the admissibility of this evidence once the case goes to trial, assuming it does. So we will have much more on this interesting and, of course, tragic case as it plays out. This is John Collins with your Crime in the Courtroom update for December 17th, 2024. I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.